What happens when a husband plays the victim, but behind the facade, he's hiding a deadly secret, a life lost, a tragic disappearance, and a web of lies that only the truth could untangle. In a case that begins as a missing persons investigation, but soon spirals into something far darker, we find a woman's life shattered and a family left grasping for answers. But sometimes, the ones who seem the most innocent are the ones who are hiding the most dangerous truths. What happens when the victim becomes the killer? This is the story of Crystal McDowell, her shocking disappearance, the twisted secrets that led to her death, and the dark truth behind a man who never expected his lies to be exposed. Before her life was tragically cut short, Crystal McDowell was a vibrant woman, full of life and ambition, a mother of two, a real estate agent, and someone who always seemed to have a smile on her face. Crystal had learned how to navigate through life's toughest challenges. But her story didn't begin with sunshine and rainbows. It began with heartache, loss, and tragedy. When Crystal was just 11 years old, she lost both of her parents to AIDS-related complications. Left to fend for herself, she was forced to grow up fast. Yet, despite all that she'd endured, Crystal was a fighter. She overcame unimaginable obstacles, including surviving sexual assault as a young girl. To find solace in a loving home with her aunt and uncle in Baytown, Texas. But even through this painful past, Crystal remained strong. She went on to become a successful real estate agent, building a life for herself and her two children. By all accounts, she was a woman who overcame adversity at every turn, never allowing her past to define her. However, beneath her strength and success, there were hidden truths about her past relationships, truths that would later unravel in the most devastating way. But it wasn't just Crystal's past that shaped her life. It was her relationships that ultimately led to her untimely death. Crystal had been married twice, but her relationship with her second husband, Stephen McDowell, was where the story takes a darker turn. Stephen McDowell was a man who appeared charming at first. He had the type of personality that could put anyone at ease. But what was lurking beneath his seemingly calm exterior would shock those closest to him. In the beginning, Crystal and Stephen's marriage was like any other, full of hopes, dreams, and plans for the future. They had two children together, and from the outside, it looked like they were a family living the American dream. However, behind closed doors, things were different. Crystal's loved ones described Stephen as controlling and manipulative. There were rumors of constant arguments, with Crystal being subjected to emotional abuse and belittling comments. But the worst was yet to come. As time passed, Crystal began to realize that Stephen had a dark side. He became increasingly possessive and paranoid, and soon, Crystal found herself trapped in a toxic marriage, unsure of how to escape. The turning point came on August 25th, 2017. Crystal McDowell went missing just as Hurricane Harvey, one of the most devastating storms in Texas history, began barreling down on the Houston area. Crystal had plans to meet with her children, but she never arrived. As the storm worsened, the urgency of the situation became even more pressing. Her family immediately grew concerned and began searching for her. They couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As authorities launched a formal investigation, it became clear that Crystal hadn't just gone missing. She had been taken, and all signs pointed towards Stephen McDowell as the prime suspect. However, Stephen, ever the victim, was quick to paint himself as a grieving ex-husband, the one who had lost everything. He played the role of the victim to perfection, desperate, distraught, and confused. But in reality, it was all a calculated act. The search for Crystal lasted for days, but the storm's fury made it nearly impossible to find any clues. However, the truth would come to light when authorities discovered Crystal's lifeless body in a wooded area in Chambers County, about 40 miles away from her home. Hidden in the brush, her body was found partially covered, left to rot in the harsh elements. But even more chilling was the discovery that her ex-husband, Stephen, was far from the grieving spouse he had portrayed himself to be. Stephen McDowell was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The shocking twist. His attempt to play the victim, his manipulation of family and friends, was nothing more than an elaborate ploy to cover up his dark deeds. Investigators uncovered a series of texts, lies, and inconsistencies in his story that painted a clear picture of his guilt. The husband who once cried on TV for the safe return of his wife had been the one to end her life in cold blood. Before her tragic end, Crystal McDowell was a woman who had fought through unspeakable hardship, showing an unbreakable spirit that made her a survivor in every sense. She was born Crystal Surratt, a name that would carry a history she could never escape. By the time she was just 11 years old, Crystal had already been dealt a devastating blow. Her parents both died from age-related complications. In the blink of an eye, she was orphaned and thrust into a world that offered no safety or refuge. But Crystal's story didn't end there. She found new hope in the arms of her aunt and uncle, who took her in and raised her in Baytown, Texas. Crystal grew up, overcame the trauma of her youth, and eventually became a successful real estate agent. She had 2 beautiful children and a promising career ahead of her. Her life, from the outside, seemed to be a picture of success. Yet the shadow of her past would never fully leave, a past that would catch up with her in the most tragic of ways. It was August 25th, 2017, just days before the catastrophic Hurricane Harvey was about to strike. Crystal McDowell was preparing for the storm like many in the Houston area, boarding up windows, gathering supplies, and ensuring her children were safe. But it would be a different kind of storm that would change her life forever. That evening, Crystal had made plans to meet with her estranged husband, Stephen McDowell. They had been separated for some time, but their relationship had remained complicated. Crystal had recently reconnected with Stephen under the guise of discussing their children and the ongoing custody arrangements. But as the hours ticked by, something didn't feel right. Crystal was last seen in her car, heading towards her ex-husband's home, never to be heard from again. As the storm closed in on Houston, Crystal vanished into thin air. Her car was found abandoned, but she was nowhere to be found. The search was frantic, but the storm's fury complicated matters. The next 48 hours were filled with confusion, fear, and uncertainty. Did the storm take her? Or was there something far more sinister at play? For days, Crystal McDowell's family, friends, and authorities combed through the Houston area, desperate to find any sign of the missing mother. The air was thick with fear, and as the clock ticked on, the once hopeful search turned into a grim realization. Crystal wasn't just lost. Something far darker was unfolding. But who was responsible? Was it the storm that had swallowed her, or someone much closer? As the days wore on, family and friends posted desperate pleas for help on social media, hoping to catch a break, anything that would lead them to Crystal. Yet, as authorities delved deeper into the investigation, one name kept surfacing: Crystal's ex-husband, Stephen McDowell. But what made this case even more complicated was the fact that Crystal had been involved in a rocky relationship with Stephen McDowell. Friends and family had always noticed tension between them, but no one ever imagined it could escalate to something this horrific. Now, all eyes turned to Stephen. Was he hiding something? Was his demeanor during the search genuine? Or was it a carefully crafted performance? But as the investigation deepened, Stephen's behavior raised more red flags. While the authorities were focused on the search for Crystal, Stephen began to paint himself as a victim, a worried ex-husband, devastated by the sudden disappearance of the mother of his children. But was this truly the reaction of a heartbroken man, or was it the mask of a predator? As the search for Crystal intensified, so did the tension in her family. They knew something wasn't right. Stephen's claims of innocence were growing thin, and law enforcement had started to believe that the key to finding Crystal lay not in the storm, but in the one person who was supposed to protect her. All the while, the storm clouds of Hurricane Harvey loomed, cutting off much-needed resources for the investigation. But with each passing day, the walls were closing in on Stephen McDowell. But the truth was buried deep in the woods of Chambers County, Texas. And the key to uncovering it was one simple thing: a lie. What began as a search for a missing woman quickly transformed into a haunting search for answers. Just days after Hurricane Harvey devastated the Texas coast, a chilling discovery would unravel the horrifying truth. On the morning of August 30th, 2017, in a remote, wooded area of Chambers County, a search team uncovered the lifeless body of Crystal McDowell. It was a discovery that sent shockwaves through the community. Her body, hidden in the dense woods, painted a grim picture. But who could have done this to a mother of two, a woman with so much life ahead of her? And why had someone gone to such lengths to cover it up? Crystal's body was found just miles from where she had vanished. But it wasn't the location of the discovery that shocked everyone. It was a realization that her disappearance had not been a random act of fate. The investigation was about to take a dark turn. Authorities quickly began to piece together the evidence. Signs of foul play, bruising on her body, and the disturbing fact that her ex-husband, Stephen McDowell, had been the last person to see her alive. While investigators were working tirelessly to uncover the full extent of Crystal's final moments, Stephen McDowell, her ex-husband, was acting strangely calm. His public appearances were chilling. He played the role of the concerned father, speaking about his missing wife in interviews. But detectives quickly noticed something was off. What was supposed to be an act of worry quickly began to feel more like an act of deception. As investigators dug deeper into Stephen McDowell's life, the dark secrets began to surface. The seemingly loving husband, father, and victim was slowly being revealed for the manipulator he truly was. When the news broke that Crystal McDowell's body had been found, the investigation shifted in a direction no one expected. For days, the search for Crystal had seemed like a grim waiting game. Each passing hour felt like a final, cruel countdown. But when authorities pulled Crystal's lifeless body from a wooded area in the outskirts of Baytown, Texas, everything changed. Crystal's family, desperate for answers, would soon discover that their worst nightmare was just beginning. The person who had been acting as the grieving ex-husband, the one who claimed to be searching for Crystal, was about to face a shocking revelation of his own dark secrets. But the more authorities dug, the more they began to uncover a story far darker than they ever could have imagined. Stephen McDowell, once considered a grieving ex-husband, soon found himself in handcuffs. His previous role as a victim, a man wrongly accused by his ex-wife's family, crumbled as the truth was revealed. The investigation uncovered inconsistencies in his story, contradictions in his alibis, and chilling clues that hinted at something far more sinister. As investigators continued to piece together Stephen McDowell's past, a disturbing portrait began to emerge. A man willing to go to unimaginable lengths to conceal his own deadly secret. The motive behind Crystal's brutal murder was tied to money, control, and a dark obsession with possession. Stephen McDowell had a clear plan in mind: eliminate Crystal to take control of her life and the financial windfall he had been chasing. The marriage had already broken down, but the promise of money from Crystal's life insurance policy, money that would go to him, became his twisted obsession. The scheme was chilling in its simplicity. Stephen knew Crystal's life was worth more to him dead than alive. He plotted her murder to gain financial freedom, but the true extent of his deceit was only starting to unravel. His portrayal of a victim, of an innocent man devastated by the loss of his ex-wife, was a lie so convincing that even those closest to him had fallen for it. After months of shocking revelations, the case finally made it to trial. Stephen McDowell faced a full force of justice as prosecutors presented a compelling case, piecing together the dark truth behind Crystal's tragic murder. The world watched as a man who had once played the role of a devastated ex-husband now stood accused of a crime that defied all comprehension. The courtroom drama was intense. As witnesses took the stand and new evidence continued to surface, including chilling text messages, phone records, and surveillance footage that pointed to Stephen's involvement in Crystal's tragic death. One thing became clear: Stephen's act had worn thin, and his true face was finally exposed. Stephen McDowell had managed to keep a perfect image, at least on the surface. While Crystal was missing, he portrayed himself as distraught, the heartbroken ex-husband devastated by the storm that had torn his life apart. But as the investigation deepened, cracks began to show in his perfect facade. His behavior during interviews with police was unnerving. Too calm for a man whose former wife had disappeared just days before one of the most destructive hurricanes in U.S. history. But the authorities knew something was off. The question was, what was he hiding? Asterisk, as investigators peeled back the layers of Stephen McDowell's life, disturbing details began to surface. Details he had worked so carefully to keep hidden. The facade of the grieving ex-husband began to fall apart as more and more evidence pointed to one shocking conclusion. Stephen had killed Crystal, but why? Stephen's previous relationships were marked by turbulence and control. He had a history of emotional manipulation, and those close to him began to realize that Crystal had been just another pawn in his dark game. As the police dug deeper, they uncovered financial issues, a brewing argument over their children, and a dangerous obsession with control. Crystal was planning to break free from Stephen. She was starting a new life, one without him, and that, it seemed, was something Stephen couldn't bear. Asterisk, though Hurricane Harvey had forced the investigators to delay the search, it had also given Stephen the time he needed to cover his tracks. The storm had provided the perfect distraction. It was only a matter of time before the pieces of the puzzle began to align. Asterisk, it wasn't until weeks after the storm had passed, when the floodwaters finally receded, that investigators discovered Crystal McDowell's body hidden in a remote area of a wooded part of town, just miles from her home. The search had ended, but for Stephen McDowell, the nightmare was just beginning. Through a combination of phone records, witness statements, and forensic evidence, police pieced together the chilling truth. Stephen McDowell had played the victim, hoping to deceive everyone. But the cracks in his alibi were too wide to ignore. The lies he told were finally exposed. Asterisk, with Stephen's arrest, the community was left in disbelief. The man who had seemed like a grieving ex-husband was now behind bars, facing charges for the murder of the woman he once claimed to love. Asterisk, justice would come slowly, but for Crystal's family, the truth was a bitter pill to swallow. Their world was forever changed by the betrayal of the man they had once trusted. Asterisk, the case of Crystal McDowell is a tragic reminder of how deception can mask the darkest of secrets. The story of a man who played the victim while hiding a horrifying truth is one that will haunt those who knew Crystal for years to come. As for Stephen McDowell, justice is still being pursued, but for Crystal's family, nothing can undo the damage he has caused. This case reminds us of the importance of looking beyond the surface, of never taking someone's story at face value, especially when it's being told by the very person who might have something to hide. But it's also a testament to the power of truth, because even when the storm clouds of life seem to cover up the darkest deeds, the truth has a way of emerging. Thank you for watching. If you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And if you have any thoughts or theories on this case, feel free to comment below. We'd love to hear your perspective.